Blood on wet asphalt looks black under the streetlights. Victor Hale built his empire on cold logic, calculated violence, and absolute control. He didn't panic. He didn't care. Until tonight. When he found his assistant, Isabel, broken on the pavement, a casualty of a rival's hit and run, the icy king of the city didn't call for an ambulance. He called his cleaners. And the order he gave next didn't just break the rules of the underworld. It shattered them. Listen closely. Isabel Hayes hated the rain in this city. It didn't wash anything clean. It only made the grime slicker, dragging the oil and the dirt out of the concrete pores and spreading it across the sidewalks. She walked quickly, her sensible heels clicking a sharp rhythmic tempo against the pavement. In her left hand, she held a heavy, wax-sealed manila envelope. In her right, a cardboard tray holding a single scalding cup of black coffee. Not just any coffee. A specific roast from a tiny mob-owned cafe 3 blocks from the Hale Syndicate's downtown headquarters. Victor Hale drank exactly 1 cup at 8 o'clock every evening. He didn't ask for it anymore. Isabel just knew. For 3 years, Isabel had been the invisible current keeping Victor's empire running. She wasn't a soldier, she didn't carry a gun, and she didn't sit in on the bloody backroom negotiations. She was a ghost in a tailored gray skirt suit. She managed the ledgers, sanitized the payrolls, and organized the bribes. She knew where the bodies were buried because she was the one who quietly filed the landscaping permits. She paused at the corner of 4th and Pike. The crossing signal glowed a steady, wet red. The street was empty, save for a few abandoned sedans parked against the curb. Isabel pulled her trench coat tighter against the biting wind. She was thinking about the spreadsheet waiting on her desk, the discrepancy in the Southside shipping manifests, when she heard the engine. It was a low, hungry growl. Isabel turned her head. A heavy, matte black Lincoln Continental sat idling half a block away, its headlights off. It had no business being parked in the middle of a moving lane. The light changed. The walk signal chirped. Isabel stepped off the curb. The Lincoln's headlights flared on, blindingly bright. The engine roared, a sudden, violent explosion of sound that bounced off the brick facades. Tires screamed against the wet asphalt, spinning for a fraction of a second before catching traction. Isabel froze. The lizard brain took over, flooding her system with adrenaline, but high heels and wet pavement offered no escape. She had exactly 1 second to realize the car wasn't swerving. It was aiming. The impact sounded like a dropped melon. The grill caught her hip, throwing her violently up onto the hood. Her shoulder shattered the windshield in a spider web of frosted glass. The momentum carried her over the roof, and gravity dragged her back down to the unyielding earth. She hit the asphalt hard, tumbling twice before coming to a stop in the gutter. The cardboard tray crushed beneath her. The coffee spilled, mixing instantly with the rainwater and the sudden thick pooling of dark blood from a gash on her forehead. The manila envelope skittered across the street, coming to rest against a sewer grate. The Lincoln didn't stop. Its taillights bled into the thick evening fog like twin dying embers as it took the next corner at 50 miles an hour and vanished. Isabel lay still. The rain fell onto her open eyes, her vision blurred, reducing the neon signs above to smeared smears of red and blue. Her chest refused to expand. Every time she tried to pull in a breath, A jagged spike of white-hot agony drove through her ribs. She couldn't feel her legs. The envelope, she thought, her mind detaching from the trauma of her body. I dropped the envelope. She tried to reach out, but her right arm wouldn't obey the command. The edges of her vision began to darken, closing in like a shutter. The sound of the rain faded into a dull, rushing hum. 2 miles away, Victor Hale sat behind a massive mahogany desk, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. He was a man carved from marble and ice. Sharp jaw, immaculate charcoal suit, eyes the color of a winter ocean. He did not fidget. He did not pace. He simply existed, dominating whatever space he occupied through absolute stillness. His phone buzzed, a single vibration against the wood. He didn't look at the caller ID. Only 3 people had this number. "Speak." "Mr. Hale." It was Detective Corby, a vice cop whose mortgage was paid directly from Victor's offshore accounts. The man's voice was tight, shaking even. "There's been a situation. 4th and Pike." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. He checked his watch. 8:15. Isabel was late. "Define situation, Corby." "It's your girl, Mr. Hale. The blonde, the assistant. She's been hit." Victor stopped breathing. Just for a second. The silence in the office suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. "Is she dead?" "No, paramedics are 2 minutes out, but..." "It's bad, Victor. It was a hit and run. Looked intentional. Skid marks indicate acceleration right into the crosswalk." "Call the bus off," Victor ordered, his voice dropping into a register that made grown men tremble. "Cancel the paramedics. Clear the street. If a single flashing light shows up on that block, I will personally pull your teeth out with pliers." "Victor, she needs a hospital." "I have my own hospital. Lock down the block. Now." Victor hung up. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out. His driver, a massive wall of muscle named Tommy Quinn, saw his boss's face and didn't ask questions. He simply opened the door to the armored SUV and got behind the wheel. "4th and Pike," Victor said. "Drive on the sidewalks if you have to." They arrived in 4 minutes. The intersection was cordoned off by 2 unmarked police cruisers. Corby stood in the rain, looking miserable. Victor stepped out of the SUV before it fully stopped. He didn't bother with an umbrella. He walked past the detective without a glance, his eyes locked on the crumpled form in the gutter. Isabel. Victor fell to his knees on the wet asphalt. The water instantly soaked through the knees of his bespoke trousers. He didn't care. He reached out, his usually steady hands hovering over her. Her trench coat was torn, saturated with muddy water and blood. Her face was pale, her lips tinged blue. He pressed 2 fingers to the hollow of her throat. The pulse was there, faint, fluttering like a dying moth. "Tommy," Victor said. The word was quiet, but it carried across the street. "Get the stretcher from the trunk, carefully." Victor looked down at Isabel. He noticed the crushed coffee cup near her hand. He noticed the blood matting her blonde hair. And then he saw the manila envelope resting against the sewer grate. It had tire tracks over the wax seal. A cold, terrifying clarity settled over Victor's mind. The underworld was a game of chess. Pawns were sacrificed. Knights were traded. But Isabel wasn't on the board. She was the one who set the pieces up. Someone had reached past the game and touched what was his. Tommy brought the collapsible stretcher. Together, with agonizing care, they lifted her. Isabel let out a small, broken whimper, but didn't wake. Victor climbed into the back of the SUV with her, stripping off his suit jacket and laying it gently over her shivering form. "Doc Aris," Victor said to the rearview mirror. "Tell him if she dies on his table, I'll burn his clinic with him inside it." Dr. Aris's clinic was located beneath a shuttered veterinary office in the meatpacking district. It smelled of industrial bleach, wet dog, and metallic copper. It was where the Hale Syndicate took its bullet holes and stab wounds, avoiding the pesky paperwork of a city hospital. Victor sat in a cheap, molded plastic chair in the hallway outside the operating room. He had been sitting there for 3 hours. His white dress shirt was stained with rust-colored smears of Isabel's blood. He hadn't washed his hands. He wanted to feel it drying on his skin. He needed the physical reminder of the debt that had just been incurred. Tommy stood by the exit, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He held a tablet in his hands, scrolling through traffic camera feeds and street-level chatter. "Boss," Tommy finally said, breaking the oppressive silence. "I got word from the street. It was Russo." Victor didn't look up from the scuffed linoleum floor. "Explain." "The Lincoln was dumped by the river, stolen 2 days ago, but the bumper fell off a few blocks from the hit. Had a custom vanity plate welded to the inside, RUSSO. It's his calling card, Victor. He wants us to know it was him. I'm Romano Russo, a second-tier mob boss from the east side trying to muscle his way into the downtown shipping lanes." Russo was known for being loud, sloppy, and unnecessarily brutal. For weeks, Russo had been demanding a sit-down, demanding a cut of Hale's imports. Victor had ignored him. Russo was a mosquito buzzing around a lion, until tonight. "A message," Victor murmured, his voice dead flat. "He's pushing, boss. He took out your assistant to show he can get close to your inner circle. He expects us to hit back, probably waiting for us to raid his warehouses tonight. He'll have men waiting." Victor slowly raised his head. His eyes were devoid of any recognizable human emotion. They were black voids. "He took out my assistant," Victor repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The heavy metal doors of the operating room swung open. Dr. Aris stepped out, pulling down his surgical mask. He looked exhausted. Victor stood up. He didn't ask. He just waited. "She's alive," Aris said quickly, reading the lethal stillness in Victor's posture. "But it was close, Mr. Hale. 4 fractured ribs, 2 of them cleanly snapped, shattered left collarbone, severe concussion and a minor subdural hematoma, brain bleed. We relieved the pressure. She's got a bruised spleen and enough road rash to require skin grafts later, but the internal bleeding has stopped." "Will she walk?" "Yes, eventually. She needs rest, a lot of it. It'll be weeks before she can even hold a pen, let alone sit at a desk." Victor exhaled. It was a slow, controlled release of breath. "I want to see her." "She's heavily sedated, Victor. She might not even know you're there." "I want to see her." Aris stepped aside. Victor walked into the recovery room. It was stark white, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. Isabel lay in the center of the bed, looking impossibly small. Wires trailed from her chest to monitors that beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm. Her left arm and shoulder were heavily wrapped in thick white bandages. Half her face was obscured by gauze, the visible skin painted yellow and purple with blooming bruises. Victor pulled up a metal stool and sat beside the bed. He looked at her hands. Usually they were flying across a keyboard, or deftly sorting through stacks of $100 bills. Now her right hand lay limp on the thin cotton blanket, an IV needle taped to the back of it. Gently, terrified he might break her further, Victor reached out and let his fingers brush against hers. Her skin was cold. He had spent 3 years with this woman. He knew how she took her tea on rainy days. He knew she hated the smell of cigar smoke. He knew she sent money every month to a nursing home in Ohio for a mother who didn't remember her. He relied on her. She was the barrier between his chaotic, violent world and total anarchy. But sitting here, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest, Victor realized with a sickening jolt that it wasn't just reliance. It was something entirely different. Something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since he took over the syndicate a decade ago. Attachment. He needed her alive, not for the business, for him. Isabel shifted on the bed. A low groan escaped her lips. Her eyelids fluttered, struggling against the heavy narcotics pumping through her veins. Victor leaned in closer. Isabel! Her eyes opened to narrow slits. They were glassy and unfocused. She blinked slowly, trying to process the bright lights and the dark silhouette hovering over her. Mr. Hale! Her voice was a raspy whisper, dry as cracked earth. I'm here. She swallowed hard, grimacing as the movement pulled at her collarbone. I'm sorry, she slurred, her brow furrowing in distress. Victor frowned. Sorry for what? You got hit by a car, Isabel? The envelope, she whispered, a tear leaking from the corner of her eye. I dropped the envelope. In the gutter. The payroll. It got wet. Victor stared at her. She was shattered, glued together by painkillers and bandages, and she was apologizing for his paperwork. A strange, sharp ache bloomed in his chest. It felt remarkably like a heartbreaking. The envelope is fine, he lied, his voice unusually soft. I have it. Everything is fine. Coffee. Drop that too. I don't need coffee tonight. He stroked the back of her uninjured hand with his thumb. Close your eyes, Isabel. Sleep. You don't have to worry about the payroll. You don't have to worry about anything. Okay, she breathed, the drugs pulling her back under. See you. Tomorrow, boss. Her eyes slid shut. Her breathing deepened. Victor sat there for another 5 minutes. He watched her sleep. He cataloged every bruise, every bandage, every labored breath. He committed the image to memory, burning it into the back of his eyelids. When he finally stood up, the softness was gone. The man who had gently stroked his assistant's hand vanished, replaced by the apex predator of the city's underworld. He walked out of the recovery room. Tommy was waiting in the hall. Tommy, Victor said, rolling down his blood-stained sleeves. Call the capos, all of them. Tell them to meet me at the South Side warehouse in 1 hour. We hitting Russo's docks tonight? Tommy asked, practically vibrating with the anticipation of a sanctioned hit. Victor looked at him. No, just get the men. The South Side warehouse smelled of damp cardboard, stale tobacco, and motor oil. It was a cavernous space, dimly lit by hanging industrial bulbs that cast long, distorted shadows against the corrugated metal walls. A heavy wooden table sat in the center of the floor. Around it sat 7 men, the lieutenants, the capos, the men who managed the gambling, the docks, the extortion, and the muscle for the Hale syndicate. They were hard men, killers in expensive suits. But as Victor Hale walked into the room, Every single one of them stopped talking, stood up, and buttoned their jackets in a show of absolute respect. Victor walked to the head of the table. He didn't sit. He placed his hands flat on the rough wood and looked at each man in turn. "Sit," he commanded. They sat in unison. The silence was thick enough to choke on. 2 hours ago, Victor began, his voice calm, conversational, and utterly terrifying. Romano Russo ordered a hit on Isabel Hayes. They ran her down in the street, left a bumper with his name on it to make sure I got the message. A murmur rippled through the table. Tony, the Hammer. Marconi, who ran the docks, leaned forward. "That's out of line, boss. She's civilian staff, not in the game. You want me to take a crew down to Russo's shipping yards tonight? We can burn his latest import of black market electronics. That'll cost him a couple of million. Set him straight on the rules of engagement." "Yeah," chimed in Paulie, the enforcer. "Or we hit his lieutenants, take out his top 3 guys, surgical strikes, bleed his leadership." This was how the mob functioned: action and reaction, tit for tat. A calculated exchange of violence meant to establish boundaries and enforce respect. A civilian was hit, so you hit their wallet or their soldiers. You negotiated through blood, but you kept it within the unspoken boundaries of the Commission's rules. Victor listened to them strategize. He let them lay out the logical, proportional responses. He waited until the table fell quiet again. "We are not touching his shipping yards," Victor said. The men exchanged confused glances. "And we are not hitting his lieutenants," Victor continued. He stood up straight, unbuttoning his suit jacket. "Romano Russo thinks this is a game. He thinks he moved a pawn, and now he is waiting for me to move a knight. He believes we are playing by the rules." Victor leaned forward again, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fire. "I am flipping the board." He looked at Tommy, who stood by the door. "Tommy, bring up the map." Tommy turned on a projector. A detailed map of the city illuminated the warehouse wall. Dozens of red pins dotted the east side. "These," Victor pointed at the pins, "are Russo's legitimate fronts, the dry cleaners, the 3 Italian restaurants, the car wash on 5th, his brother's used car dealership in the valley, his mother's bakery." The room went deathly still. Tony Marconi swallowed hard. "Boss, those are civilian fronts. The Commission—" "Fuck the Commission," Victor said softly. The profanity, rare from Victor, hit the room like a gunshot. "Russo brought the war to the sidewalk. He involved my people, my civilian. So, we involve his." Victor traced a line across the map with his finger. "I want every single one of these businesses burned to the ground by sunrise. I don't mean damaged, I mean scorched earth. I want the foundations reduced to ash." Paulie raised a hesitant hand. "What about the people inside, the security, the managers? If they hold a key to a Russo property, they don't get to breathe tomorrow," Victor stated, his voice devoid of mercy. "I want the managers. I want the accountants. I want the lawyers who draft his leases. If they cash a check signed by anyone in the Russo family, you put them in the ground." The capos stared at him in absolute shock. This wasn't a retaliation. This was an extermination. It was a violation of every Mafia code established in the last century. You didn't touch the legitimate fronts. You didn't slaughter the civilians who ran them. "Victor," Tony said, using his first name, a sign of deep concern. "If we do this, the other families, they'll declare war on us. It's a total breach of protocol. You're talking about burning down a man's entire life over a secretary. Victor turned his gaze on Tony. It was like looking into a glacier. Isabel Hayes is not just a secretary. She is mine, under my protection. Russo shattered her collarbone. I am going to shatter his entire world. I want him to wake up tomorrow morning with no money, no fronts, no lawyers, and no family businesses. I want him isolated, terrified, and utterly ruined before I even think about killing him. Victor looked around the table. I am going to make an example of Romano Russo that will echo through this city for the next 50 years. Anyone who even looks at someone I care about will remember tonight. Now, do any of you have a problem with my orders? No one spoke. The sheer, uncompromising gravity of Victor's wrath suffocated any argument. They realized, with a collective chill, that Victor Hale wasn't just a cold businessman anymore. A switch had been flipped. The monster had been unchained, and it was raging over the broken body of a woman they had barely noticed. Good, Victor said, stepping away from the table. You have your targets. Do not come back to me until the east side is on fire. Victor walked out of the warehouse into the rainy night. The cool air did nothing to extinguish the furnace burning in his chest. He pulled out his phone and dialed Dr. Aris. Aris, how is she? Resting, Mr. Hale. Vitals are stable. Keep her comfortable, Victor ordered, looking toward the east side of the city. When she wakes up again, the sky is going to look a little brighter. He hung up, got back into his SUV, and waited for the world to burn. By 4 a.m., the east side of the city smelled of roasted brick, melted synthetic rubber, and ozone. The Hale Syndicate did not operate with the chaotic, shouting bravado of street gangs. They worked like a corporate demolition crew, methodical, silent, devastating. They hit the dry cleaners first, disabling the sprinkler systems and introducing chemical accelerants to the industrial vats of perfluoroethylene. The resulting explosion shattered windows for 3 blocks. The bakeries went next, then the car wash, the accounting firms, and the strip malls that funneled Romano Russo's dirty cash into clean bank accounts. 50 years of Mafia protocol burned to the ground in a single, synchronized wave of arson. Fire trucks wailed through the slick, rain-soaked streets, gridlocked by the sheer volume of simultaneous emergencies. Victor Hale stood on the roof of a parking garage overlooking the river. He watched the orange glow pulse against the low-hanging clouds. It looked like a false sunrise. His phone had not stopped vibrating for 2 hours. He didn't answer it. The message had been delivered. He didn't need to read the receipts. He turned away from the edge, his tailored coat catching the frigid wind. Tommy, he said to the shadow, standing by the stairwell, bring the car around. We're going back to the clinic. Inside Dr. Aris's subterranean recovery room, the world was a sterile, suffocating white. Isabel surfaced from the narcotic deep like a drowning victim breaking water. She didn't gasp. Her lungs wouldn't allow it. A tight, unyielding band of agony wrapped around her chest, limiting her breath to shallow, reedy sips. She opened her eyes. The fluorescent light directly above her bed buzzed, a high-pitched hum that bored directly into her skull. She tried to turn her head, but the muscles in her neck seized, sending a violent spasm of pain down her spine. Don't move. The voice was a low rumble. It didn't belong in a hospital room. It belonged at the head of a mahogany boardroom table or echoing in the cold steel of a shipping yard. Isabel shifted her gaze, her eyes tracking painfully to the right. Victor was sitting in the cheap plastic chair beside her bed. He looked exactly the same as he always did. Immaculate, composed, an apex predator at rest. But there were microscopic fractures in the facade. His tie was loosened. The top button of his shirt was undone. And his eyes, usually a flat, impenetrable gray, were rimmed with a faint, bruised red. "Boss," she managed to croak. Her throat felt like it was lined with shattered glass. Victor poured water from a plastic pitcher into a small paper cup. He didn't hand it to her. He knew she couldn't lift her arms. He leaned forward, sliding his left hand behind her neck to support her head, and brought the rim of the cup to her dry, cracked lips. His hand was warm. His skin smelled faintly of expensive cologne, rain, and something else. Something acrid. Smoke. Isabel drank eagerly, coughing as the water hit the back of her throat. The cough ripped through her fractured ribs. She cried out, a small, pathetic sound that she instantly hated, her eyes squeezing shut against the pain. Victor's hand didn't waver. He held her steady until the spasm passed, his jaw locking so tight the muscle ticked violently. Gently, he lowered her head back onto the thin pillow. "4 ribs," Victor said, answering the question she hadn't asked. "Shattered collarbone, concussion, bruised spleen. Eris says you're going to be in bed for a while, Isabel." She stared at the ceiling, her drug-addled brain trying to stitch the pieces together. The rain, the manila envelope, the roaring engine, the blinding headlights. "It wasn't an accident," she whispered. The realization didn't come with panic. It came with a cold, hollow dread. She worked for the mob. She had always known the risks, even if she kept her hands clean of the blood. But knowing the theory and feeling the grill of a Lincoln shatter your bones were two very different things. "No," Victor said flatly. "It wasn't." Isabel turned her head back to him. The smell of smoke on his clothes was stronger now. It wasn't cigarette smoke. It was the heavy, toxic scent of burning structures. Above Victor's head, mounted on a swivel bracket in the corner of the room, a small television played a local news channel on mute. The screen was a chaotic montage of flashing lights, billowing black smoke, and collapsing roofs. A news anchor looked frantic. The chyron scrolling at the bottom of the screen read, "Multiple blazes across East Side. Suspected arson coordinated attack." Isabel looked at the screen. Then she looked at the soot smudged on the cuff of Victor's pristine white shirt. She looked back at the screen. The footage cut to the smoldering ruins of a bakery. Russo's mother's bakery. She had processed the property tax evasion files for that building just last week to blackmail a city inspector. Her breath hitched, ignoring the pain in her ribs. "Victor," she breathed, using his first name for the first time in 3 years. Her eyes widened, the heavy fog of the painkillers burning away under a flash of pure, unadulterated shock. "What did you do?" Victor didn't look at the television. He kept his eyes locked on hers. They were dark, endless, and entirely unrepentant. "I handled the payroll discrepancy," he said quietly. "Go back to sleep, Isabel." The commission did not meet in back alleys or dimly lit warehouses. They were businessmen. They met in the private dining room of the Continental Club, a heavily guarded oak-paneled sanctuary in the financial district where millionaires drank scotch older than their wives. At 10 a.m., the room was silent. 4 men sat around the antique dining table. Leo Carmine, the patriarch of the West Side, was 80 years old and breathed through a discreet oxygen tube. Yet he still commanded the room with a terrifying, quiet authority. Arthur Pendleton, who controlled the unions. Paulie Gualtieri from the Northern Rackets. And Romano Russo. Russo looked like a man who had spent the night outrunning a ghost. His custom suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He kept wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, his knee bouncing under the table. The heavy double doors opened. Victor Hale walked in. He wore a fresh suit, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored. He walked with a slow, deliberate stride, projecting total dominion over the space. He didn't wait to be invited. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table opposite Leo Carmine and sat down. "Victor," Leo wheezed, his voice like dry leaves scraping across pavement. "You have been a busy boy tonight. I took care of some structural liabilities in the city, Leo. Urban renewal." Victor poured himself a glass of water from the crystal pitcher on the table. Romano Russo slammed his fist on the table. The water in the glasses trembled. "He burned down $50 million of legitimate real estate. He killed my accountants. He killed my mother's lawyers. This is a violation. He broke the absolute rule." "Quiet, Romano," Arthur Pendleton snapped, shooting Russo a look of pure disgust. "You don't yell at the table." Leo leaned forward, resting his liver-spotted hands on the polished wood. "He is right, Victor. We have rules. The streets are the streets. The docks are the docks. But the civilian fronts, the families, that is off limits. You have crossed a line that has stood for 60 years. You went to war over a secretary." Victor slowly set his glass down. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Romano Russo ordered a hit and run on a woman who holds my ledgers," Victor said, his voice deadly calm, stripping away all emotion and leaving only cold, hard fact. "He struck a civilian, my civilian. He crossed the line first. I merely moved the line." "It was a tactical maneuver to initiate a sit-down," Russo stammered, panic leaking into his bluster. "It's how the game is played, Victor. You check the king by threatening a pawn." Victor's eyes snapped to Russo. The look was so violently intense that Russo physically recoiled in his chair. "Isabel Hayes is not a pawn," Victor said, the words cutting through the air like a straight razor. "And this is not a game. You laid hands on what is mine. You spilled blood on my sidewalk. You thought I would respond by sinking a cargo ship. You thought wrong." Victor looked back at Leo Carmine. "The old rules are dead, Leo. I am writing a new one. Any man in this city who targets my inner circle, who touches a hair on the head of the people under my protection, will not face a proportional response. They will face total annihilation. I will not just kill them. I will erase their legacy, burn their wealth, and salt the earth where their houses stood. The East Side is ash today. That is the new rule. Enforce it or test it. The choice is yours." The silence in the dining room was absolute. Arthur Pendleton looked down at his hands. Even Leo Carmine remained silent, his calculating eyes weighing the cost of a war against the Hale Syndicate. Victor was younger, richer, and as of last night, entirely unhinged. A rational boss could be negotiated with. A boss driven by this kind of protective fury was a natural disaster. You couldn't negotiate with a hurricane. You just tried to survive it. What do you want, Victor? Leo finally asked. I want Romano Russo stripped of his seat, Victor declared. You can't do that, Russo screamed, leaping to his feet. Sit down, Romano, Leo commanded, the wheeze gone, replaced by iron. Russo slowly sat. Leo looked at Victor. And then, Victor said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He has 24 hours to run. If he is inside the city limits tomorrow at noon, I will hunt him down myself, and anyone who hides him will burn with him. Victor didn't wait for a dismissal. He turned his back on the commission and walked out of the heavy double doors. He had a city to run, an empire to rebuild, and a woman to check on. 3 weeks later, the physical agony of shattered bone had dulled to a relentless throbbing ache. Isabel had been moved from Dr. Aris's underground clinic on the 3rd day. She hadn't been taken to her small, pragmatic apartment in the financial district. She had been sedated, loaded into a private ambulance, and driven an hour north to Victor Hale's private estate. It was a fortress disguised as a modern architectural marvel, glass, steel, and dark stone surrounded by 50 acres of private forest and a security perimeter that rivaled a military black site. Isabel had managed the property taxes on it for years, but she had never seen it. She spent her days in a guest bedroom the size of her entire apartment. The walls were painted a soft, muted gray, matching the heavy silk drapes that framed floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a manicured courtyard. A private nurse checked her vitals twice a day, changed her bandages, and helped her bathe. But it wasn't the luxury that unnerved Isabel. It was the presence of the ghost. Victor had moved his entire base of operations to the estate. He worked from the library down the hall. For the first 2 weeks, she barely saw him. He was a phantom, leaving a fresh cup of her favorite tea on her bedside table while she slept, sending Tommy in with books and a tablet loaded with movies. But as she regained her strength, as the heavy painkillers were stepped down to milder doses, the boundaries began to blur. It was a Tuesday evening. The rain was lashing against the reinforced glass windows, a bitter reminder of the asphalt. Isabel sat on the edge of the massive king-sized bed. She wore a silk pajama set, the left side loosely buttoned to accommodate the heavy sling holding her shattered collarbone in place. The skin grafts on her legs were healing, but they pulled tight and burned whenever she moved. She was thirsty. The silver carafe of water sat on the dresser across the room. The nurse was on dinner break. Isabel looked at the carafe. She looked at her legs. I can do this, she thought. I manage millions of dollars a day. I can walk 10 feet. She pushed herself off the mattress. Her right hand gripped the bedpost. Her bare feet touched the cold hardwood floor. She took a breath, letting go of the post, and took a step. Her left leg gave out immediately. The muscle, weakened by trauma and atrophy, simply refused to bear her weight. She pitched forward, a gasp escaping her lips, bracing herself for the jarring, agonizing impact with the floor. It never came. Strong hands caught her under the arms, hauling her upright before her knees could strike the wood. The scent of rain, bergamot, and clean linen washed over her. Victor, he didn't say a word. He just lifted her, effortlessly, as if she weighed no more than a sheaf of paper, and deposited her back onto the edge of the bed. He didn't step back. He stayed close, his hands resting on the mattress on either side of her hips, caging her in. His face was inches from hers, She could see the dark stubble shadowing his jaw, the exhaustion etched into the corners of his slate-gray eyes. "You are supposed to ring the bell," he said. His voice wasn't an order. It was a rough, quiet scolding, layered with something that made Isabel's breath catch in her throat. "I just wanted water," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. She was a professional. She was his employee. She shouldn't be sitting in his house, in his silk pajamas, feeling her heart pound a frantic rhythm against her fractured ribs. Victor stared at her for a long second. Then he turned, walked to the dresser, poured a glass of water, and brought it back. He held it out. Isabel reached for it with her good right hand. Her fingers brushed against his knuckles. The contact was electric, a sudden sharp spike of awareness that flooded her nerve endings. She drank, the silence in the room stretching out, heavy and thick. She handed the glass back. "Thank you, boss," she murmured, looking down at her lap. "Victor," he corrected quietly, setting the glass on the nightstand. She looked up at him. "What?" "My name is Victor, Isabel. Stop calling me boss, especially here." He pulled a velvet armchair closer to the bed and sat down. He didn't look like a mob boss right now. He was wearing dark jeans and a plain black sweater. The armor was off. Isabel swallowed hard. The painkillers were fading, leaving her mind sharper, the questions that had been haunting her for 3 weeks bubbling to the surface. "Tommy told me what happened," she said softly. She watched his face for a reaction. There was none. "He told me Russo is in hiding. He told me the East Side is still cleaning up the ash." Victor leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "Tommy talks too much." "Did you do it?" Isabel asked. She needed to hear it from him. She needed to bridge the gap between the cold, calculating man who signed her paychecks and the man who had sat by her hospital bed smelling of smoke. "Did you burn his world down because of what happened to me?" Victor's eyes met hers. There was no hesitation, no denial, no polite deflection to spare her feelings. "Yes." "Why?" Isabel's voice cracked. "I'm just your assistant. It was bad business, Victor. You violated the commission's rules. You started a war. For me? It doesn't make sense." Victor uncrossed his arms. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, closing the physical distance between them. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. "You think this is about business?" he asked, his voice a low, vibrating hum that settled deep in her bones. "You think I give a damn about the commission's rules when someone tries to scrape you off the pavement?" "I don't understand," she whispered. Victor reached out. His large, rough hand, a hand that had ordered the deaths of men, a hand that had built an empire of fear, gently brushed a stray lock of blonde hair behind her ear. His thumb lingered, tracing the line of her jaw, avoiding the fading yellow bruises on her cheek. "I spent 3 years watching you run my life, Isabel," Victor said, his eyes tracing her features as if he were memorizing them all over again. "I watched you drink that terrible black tea. I watched you smile at the doorman. I watched you organize the chaos of my world into something bearable. You were the only clean thing in my life." His hand dropped away, but the heat of his touch remained, burning into her skin. "When Corby called me that night," Victor continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "and told me you were bleeding in the gutter, I didn't feel like a boss. I didn't care about the money, or the shipping lanes, or the syndicates. He looked away, staring out the window into the driving rain, the memory of that night darkening his expression. I felt like someone had reached into my chest and crushed my lungs, he admitted, the raw honesty of the statement hitting Isabel harder than the Lincoln ever could. He looked back at her, the mask completely stripped away, revealing the terrifying, consuming obsession underneath. I didn't burn the East Side because you are my assistant, Isabel. I burned it because they touched you. And if I have to burn the rest of the world to ensure you are safe, I will strike the match myself. Do you understand me? Isabel stared into his eyes. She saw the violence there. She saw the ruthlessness that made him the most feared man in the city. But for the first time, she saw that the violence wasn't directed at her. It was a wall, a blazing inferno built entirely to protect her. She didn't run from it. She didn't pull away. She reached out with her uninjured arm and gently rested her hand over his. Yes, she breathed into the quiet room. I understand. 6 weeks passed. The rain of late autumn gave way to the bitter, biting frost of early winter. Isabel's body knitted itself back together with agonizing slowness. The sling came off. The heavy bandages were reduced to thin gauze over the pink, tight skin of her grafts. She walked with a slight limp, a phantom twinge in her hip that Dr. Eris assured her would fade by spring. She did not return to the downtown office. She didn't ask to. Her world had shrunk to the 50 acres of Victor's estate, but strangely, it felt infinite. The boundaries between employer and employee had burned down with the East Side. Victor no longer left for the city at dawn. He ran his empire from the sprawling mahogany desk in the West Wing library, and Isabel, unable to sit idle, had simply walked in one morning and taken the leather chair opposite him. They worked in silence. She audited the accounts, her right hand typing steadily while her left rested in her lap. He negotiated shipping lanes and gambling territories on encrypted cell phones. It was an unspoken, terrifyingly domestic rhythm. It was a Thursday afternoon. The sky outside the library windows was a bruised, heavy purple, threatening snow. Isabel looked up from her laptop. Victor was standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames. He hadn't moved in 20 minutes. The glass of bourbon in his hand was untouched. The numbers from the North Side docks don't match, Isabel said, her voice breaking the quiet crackle of the fire. Tony is skimming. It's small, 3% on the import taxes. But it's there. Victor didn't turn around. Tony has a new mistress in the city. She likes diamonds. He thinks I'm too distracted to notice. Are you? She asked softly. Victor finally turned. He looked at her. He didn't see the scars or the pale exhaustion that still lingered under her eyes. He saw the steel. She had survived a hit that would have killed a lesser man, and here she was, calmly reporting a capo's theft. He walked across the Persian rug and stopped beside her chair. He set his glass on the desk. Without a word, he reached down, his fingers gently tracing the collar of her cashmere sweater, ghosting over the skin where her collarbone had shattered. I notice everything, he murmured. Isabel tilted her head back, her breath hitching. The physical proximity of him was a drug she was rapidly becoming addicted to. The air between them crackled, heavy with the weight of things unsaid, of lines they were both hovering directly over. Leo Carmine called this morning, Victor said. his voice dropping into that dark, quiet register that meant violence was brewing. Isabel stiffened. The commission. Russo didn't run. He went to ground. Leo is hiding him in the valley. Victor's jaw locked. Leo thinks I've gone soft. He thinks a man who burns down civilian fronts over a woman is unstable, bad for business. They want to remove me. They're voting tonight. Isabel stood up. Her hip twinged, but she ignored it. She closed the few inches of space between them. She wasn't just a ledger keeper anymore. She was the catalyst. Let them vote, she said, her voice steady. They don't own the docks. They don't own the politicians. You do. If they want to remove you, they have to come through your men. A slow, dark smile touched the corners of Victor's mouth. It was a terrifying expression. It was the smile of a wolf realizing the sheep had locked themselves in the pen with him. They won't go through my men, Victor said, his hand sliding to the back of her neck, his thumb resting against her pulse. They'll try to cut the head off the snake. They'll come here. The heavy oak doors of the library slammed open. Tommy stood in the threshold. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. In his hands, he held a suppressed tactical rifle. His face was pale. "Boss," Tommy said, his breathing heavy. "The perimeter sensors just tripped. North gate, south gate, and the tree line. The cameras are dead. We're cut off." Victor didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He looked down at Isabel. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced instantly by the flat Arctic gray of a killer. "How many?" Victor asked. "At least 30, professionals. They hit the outer guards before they could radio in. They're converging on the main house." "Leo sent an army," Victor stated, releasing Isabel and stepping toward the desk. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a heavy, matte black handgun. He racked the slide. The metallic clack was deafening in the quiet room. He looked at Tommy. "Lock down the steel shutters. Put every man on the ground floor. Nobody gets past the foyer." "Yes, sir." Tommy vanished down the hall. Victor turned back to Isabel. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip firm, grounding her. "Listen to me," he said, his voice urgent but entirely composed. "Behind the bookshelves there is a panic room, 6 inches of reinforced steel, independent ventilation. You go in there. You do not come out until I open the door. Do you understand?" Isabel looked at the gun in his hand, then up at his face. The fear was there, cold and sharp in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a sudden, fierce wave of refusal. "No," she said. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Isabel, this is not a negotiation." "I know the security grid, Victor," she shot back, her voice rising. "I paid the contractors who installed it. The panic room isolates you. You can't see the cameras from in there. But the secondary control panel is in your bedroom upstairs. I can track their movements. I can tell you where they are. I am not putting you in the line of fire. Get in the damn box." The first explosion shook the foundation of the house. The heavy glass of the library windows shattered inward, spraying the rug with jagged diamonds. The concussion threw Isabel forward. Victor caught her, shielding her body with his own as the shock wave rolled over them. The acrid smell of C4 filled the air. "They breached the east wing," Victor growled, pulling her to her feet. The debate was over. The panic room mechanism was wired to the primary grid. The explosion just shorted it. He grabbed her hand, his fingers lacing tightly through hers. "Upstairs, now." the estate became a slaughterhouse. The sounds of the dying filtered up through the floorboards. The staccato pop of suppressed weapons, the heavy booming echo of shotguns, the shouts of men fighting for their lives in the grand hallways below. Victor pulled Isabel into the master suite, slamming the solid oak doors and throwing the heavy deadbolts. He pushed a massive mahogany dresser across the frame. Isabel ran to the wall panel next to his closet. She ripped the decorative wooden cover off, revealing a touchscreen. Her fingers flew across the glass, bringing up the internal security feeds. 3 in the kitchen, she said, her voice shaking but her words clear. 4 in the east corridor. Tommy has them pinned at the top of the stairs, but they're flanking him through the conservatory. Victor stood by the door, his gun raised, his breathing slow and even. Tell Tommy to fall back to the second-floor landing. Choke point. Isabel grabbed the radio off the nightstand. Tommy, fall back to the landing. They're coming through the glass room. Static crackled. Copy that. Falling back. Victor looked at Isabel. She was pale, her hands trembling violently, but she was holding the radio. She was standing in the middle of a war zone, and she wasn't breaking. A fierce, dark pride swelled in his chest. Victor, she gasped, staring at the screen. What? The service elevator, the one that bypasses the ground floor. Someone triggered it. Victor cursed violently. The service elevator opened directly into the private study connected to this bedroom. Get in the closet, Victor ordered. He didn't wait for her to argue. He grabbed her arm, shoved her into the expansive walk-in closet, and shut the door. He stepped back, raising his weapon toward the adjoining study door. The handle turned. The door kicked open. 2 men in tactical gear stepped through, raising automatic weapons. Victor fired twice. 2 clean headshots. The men dropped like stones, their blood painting the expensive wallpaper. Victor stepped over their bodies, moving into the study. He didn't see the shadow behind the door until it was too late. A heavy, blunt object slammed into Victor's gun hand. The bone snapped. The weapon clattered to the floor. Before Victor could react, a body slammed into him, driving him backward over a glass coffee table. The table shattered, sending shards of glass into Victor's back. He rolled, ignoring the blinding pain, and came up in a crouch. Standing in the center of the study was Romano Russo. He didn't look like a mob boss anymore. He looked like a desperate animal. He held a heavy combat knife in his right hand. "You burned my life down," Russo screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "For a fucking secretary." Victor didn't speak. He didn't monologue. He launched himself forward. Russo swung the knife. Victor caught Russo's wrist with his good left hand, twisting violently. Russo roared in pain, but drove his knee into Victor's stomach. The impact forced the breath from Victor's lungs. Russo broke free, slashing wildly. The blade caught Victor's shoulder, slicing through the fabric of his shirt and biting deep into the muscle. Victor grunted, stumbling back against the wall. "Leo sent me himself," Russo panted, circling him. "He said you were rabid. He said to put the dog down. Where is she, Victor? Is she in the bedroom? I'm gonna finish what the car started." A switch flipped inside Victor. It wasn't the cold, calculated logic that had built his empire. It was pure, unadulterated savagery. The mere thought of this pathetic, desperate man laying hands on Isabel erased every human boundary in his mind. Russo lunged again. Victor didn't dodge. He stepped into the strike. He let the blade sink into his side, sliding off his ribs, trading the flesh wound for proximity. Russo's eyes widened in shock. Victor's left hand shot out like a piston, his fingers wrapping around Russo's throat. He squeezed. He didn't just restrict the airway, he sought to crush the trachea entirely. He drove Russo backward, slamming him against the reinforced window. The glass spiderwebbed under the impact. Russo thrashed, dropping the knife, his hands tearing frantically at Victor's iron grip. His face turned an ugly, mottled purple. "You," Victor whispered, leaning in, his face inches from Russo's, "are nothing." With a brutal, twisting motion, Victor slammed Russo's head against the window frame. Once. Twice. The thrashing stopped. Russo's eyes rolled back. Victor let him drop. The body hit the floor with a sickening thud, lifeless. Victor stood there, his chest heaving, blood soaking through his shirt and pooling on the hardwood floor. The house was suddenly quiet. The gunfire downstairs had stopped. The door to the bedroom slowly opened. Isabel stood in the doorway. She looked at the bodies in the study. She looked at Russo, crumpled and broken, beneath the window. Then she looked at Victor. He was bleeding from 3 different wounds, covered in glass and death. He looked like a monster. He waited for her to scream. He waited for her to look at him with the horror and disgust he deserved. He waited for the civilian in her to finally break. She didn't. Isabel walked across the room, her bare feet stepping over the shattered glass. She stopped right in front of him. She reached up with her good hand, her fingers trembling as she touched his face, wiping a smear of Russo's blood from his cheek. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Her voice was a cracked whisper, entirely devoid of fear. Victor stared at her, utterly undone. The adrenaline drained out of him, leaving only the staggering, overwhelming realization of what she was. She wasn't just a survivor, she was his equal. She looked at the darkness in him and didn't blink. He wrapped his good arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, burying his face in the curve of her neck. He breathed in the scent of her hair, letting it anchor him. "No," he rasped, his eyes closing. "I'm fine." Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Tommy appeared in the doorway, bleeding from a graze on his forehead, his rifle smoking. He took one look at the room, at Russo's body, and at Victor holding Isabel. "House is clear, boss," Tommy breathed heavily. "Leo's men are dead or running. We held the line." Victor lifted his head. The warmth vanished. The king returned. "Get the cars, Tommy," Victor said, his voice cold as the winter wind outside. "Call Aris to patch me up in the back seat. Then call the capos. We are paying Leo Carmine a visit." The Continental Club was entirely empty when Victor kicked the mahogany doors open. It was 3 a.m. The staff had been cleared out. Only Leo Carmine sat at the head of the antique dining table. His oxygen tank hissed softly in the dead silence of the room. He looked old, frail, a relic of an era that had just violently ended. Victor walked into the room. His arm was in a sling. A thick bandage was visible beneath his dark, unbuttoned coat. But he didn't walk like a wounded man. He walked like a conqueror. Arthur Pendleton and Paulie Gualtieri were nowhere to be found. They had smelled the shift in the wind and scattered. "Victor," Leo rasped, not looking up from the glass of water in front of him. Victor didn't sit down. He walked behind Leo's chair, stopping just inches from the old man's back. "Russo is dead," Victor stated quietly. "Your hit squad is dead. 30 of your best men, Leo, bleeding into my carpets." Leo closed his eyes. "You broke the rules, Victor. You brought chaos. I had to restore order." "Order?" Victor scoffed, a dark, humorless sound. "Your order is a myth, a gentleman's agreement among thugs. I don't operate on agreements anymore. I operate on absolutes." Victor leaned down, his voice right next to Leo's ear. "You are going to step down. Tonight. You are going to sign over the West Side territories to the Hale Syndicate. You are going to retire to Florida, and if you ever set foot in this city again, I will personally disconnect your oxygen." Leo's hands shook on the table. He was a proud man, a brutal man, but he knew when he was beaten. Victor wasn't playing Mafia politics. He was conducting a siege. "And if I refuse," Leo wheezed, "then I will do to your family what I did to Russo's," Victor promised. It wasn't a threat. It was a guarantee. "I will burn every front, every business, and every house with a Carmine name on the deed. I will leave you with nothing but ashes and ghosts." Leo Carmine slowly reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out a heavy gold pen. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, defeated. Victor turned and walked out. The war was over. The city was his. All of it. When Victor returned to the estate just before dawn, the snow had begun to fall. A thick, heavy blanket covering the blood and the broken glass in the courtyard. He walked up the stairs to the master suite. The cleaning crews had already begun their work, but the scent of bleach and copper still hung in the air. Isabel was sitting on the edge of the bed. She had showered, washing the dust and smoke from her hair. She wore one of his large white button-down shirts. It swallowed her small frame, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She looked up as he walked in. Victor stopped at the edge of the rug. He was exhausted. He was bleeding through his bandages. He held the entire city in his palm, and the only thing he wanted was the woman sitting in front of him. "Is it done?" she asked softly. "Leo stepped down," Victor said, his voice raspy. "The West Side is ours. Russo is dead. It's over." Isabel nodded slowly. She stood up, walking toward him. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look at the blood on his coat. She stepped into his space, reaching up to gently push his heavy coat off his good shoulder. "You need to rest," she murmured. "I need you," Victor said, the confession ripping out of him before he could stop it. The ruthless mob boss, the man who had just overthrown the commission, looked at her with an absolute, terrifying vulnerability. "I need you to stay, Isabel. Not as my assistant. Not in the office. Here, with me." Isabel looked up into his eyes. The last remnants of her old life, the quiet, safe, invisible life of an office worker, fell away entirely. She had stood in a war zone for this man. She had watched him kill for her. There was no going back to the ledgers. She reached up, her good hand framing his jaw, feeling the rough stubble against her palm. "I'm not going anywhere, Victor," she whispered. Victor closed the remaining distance, his mouth capturing hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, bruising, fueled by adrenaline, fear, and weeks of agonizing restraint. Isabel met his intensity, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. The taste of bourbon, rain, and ash filled her senses. He backed her toward the bed, moving slowly to accommodate both of their injuries, but unwilling to break the connection. When they finally collapsed onto the mattress, the violence of the world outside faded into nothing. The city had burned, a dynasty had fallen, and from the ashes, Victor Hale hadn't just secured his empire. He had found his queen. Victor risked his entire empire, broke every rule, and tore down the city's underworld, all to protect the woman who finally melted his icy heart. That's what we call top-tier mafia romance. Did you love seeing Isabel step up from assistant to queen? Or was Victor's brutal revenge your favorite part? Let me know in the comments below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button, share the video with your dark romance squad, and don't forget to subscribe for more epic pulse-pounding stories. See you in the next one.